Welcome to Generous Impact. This is Brett Brummett.
And this is Amanda Brummett. We are joined today by Dr. Amy Grosso with American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or AFSP. In this episode, you'll hear how they are dedicated to saving lives and bringing hope to those affected by suicide, including those who have experienced a loss. This includes funding scientific research, educating the public about mental health and suicide prevention, advocating for public policies in mental health and suicide prevention, and supporting survivors of suicide loss and those affected by suicide. This is a topic very near and dear to our hearts, and I sincerely hope that you enjoyed learning today from Dr. Grosso and that this show takes one more step towards destigmatizing the entire conversation around suicide. Amy, thank you so much for being here with us today. We really appreciate your time. And I'd love for you to tell our guests a little bit about yourself. I mean, you've got a business degree, a seminary degree, a master's in counseling, PhD in counseling, and then you have a rich work experience. Can you just walk us through that?
Yeah, I think the first thing to know is I live right outside of Austin, Texas, with my wonderful husband, Matthew, and we have a 10-year-old son, Keaton, who he would want me to say he's almost a fifth grader. He loves math and he does ninja, like American Ninja Warrior stuff. So that takes up a lot of our time. And then we also, rounding out our family, is our 4-year-old rescue pit bull, Minnie. And so it's us. And so love living in this area. Outside of that, though, my day job currently is I work for Raptor Technologies as their expert in residence. They're a school safety software company. I am not in technology at all. I just work for a company, but for them, I do a lot of speaking, content writing, just awareness about the role of mental health and school safety, and even more, how do we help early intervention for our students instead of waiting until they're a crisis. And I really got into this work many, many years ago. So this August will be 26 years since I lost my mom to suicide. It was the day after my 19th birthday. And like you said, I was on this trajectory. I have a business degree. I was going to be an accountant. And needless to say, it completely changed the course of my life. And I think it's the most wonderful example of how tragedy can lead to the brightest points I can ever imagine. And so it led me to get my degrees in counseling, be a mental health counselor, and really realized that my passion is with how do we reduce the rate of suicide for our teens and what things we can do. And so that really led me to the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, AFSP, and became a volunteer with them over 10 years ago. I'm on their Central Texas board, and then I'm also on their National Chapter Leadership Council. And so, I'm a normal person. I just am wildly passionate about mental health and for all of us, but specifically for teens and students.
I was actually reading on the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention's website that particularly here in Texas, that suicide is the number 2 killer of people between, is it like 15 and 25?
Yes, it is. And it's pretty consistently been the second leading cause of death. And that's what really got me into the school safety realm too, that we often talk about protecting our kids from outside threats, but we rarely talk about that they're at risk for suicide. And, we need to be more open about it. And I think parents need to know more and doing everything.
Yeah. Well, I love that you're working on the prevention side. I feel like we talk about it a lot after it happens, but thank you for putting up the fight early when we need to.
Absolutely. I think being reactionary has gotten us where we are with statistics in that. And, people don't realize, but this has been a trend going way up for over 10 years. So it's not just because of COVID. This has been a concern for many years.
So for listeners who are not familiar with the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention, or AFSP, could you share a little bit about the organization's mission?
Absolutely. So AFSP started in 1987, but it started purely as a research organization for suicide. There wasn't much research being done, but it is morphed to what it is today with the mission of saving lives and bringing hope to those affected by suicide. And we do those mainly under 4 big umbrellas, under research, education, and programming. advocacy, and then actual support for those who are survivors of suicide loss survivors, that's what we call it. And then also those with lived experiences. And so it started out as this tiny organization. We now have chapters in every state. And our newest chapter is actually in Puerto Rico. So that just happened a couple of years ago. And so the work is all across the United States. And we are the largest nonprofit that does this work.
It was of those umbrellas, was like, what from research, what was like that first expansion? Was it the close survivors part? That's what I would assume.
I think it just slowly started morphing. They really funded research to begin with. It was a group of individuals that had lost loved ones, and they saw that there was no research happening within suicide and how do we prevent it. And so very much wanted to do that. And then just as the years went on, I think you see that the impact can be even broader. And, to fund research, you have to fundraise. And so what does that look like? And so it really slowly morphed. And then the current CEO, Bob Gap, came in 1997. And that's when this focus on chapters and really that outreach part started to happen. And I always say it's very ironic that he came in 1997 and I left my mom in 98. And just to see how far we've come in the work of suicide prevention and being open about it, it's pretty amazing to me to see how far we've come.
Yeah, 98. I think that was my encounter as well.
Really?
Yeah.
And I keep thinking back to the 19-year-old Amy that was struggling with the loss of a mom and didn't feel like she could openly talk about it. And there weren't walks to celebrate the life of someone I lost. There wasn't any of that. And to see where we are now is pretty remarkable.
Yeah.
It is remarkable just seeing, for 98, there was a lot of let's not talk about it too.
Mm-mm.
It was shame. There was shame in it. You would rather say somebody had a heart attack. It's
interesting you say that. My grandmother, that's what she told everybody. I think with suicide, there comes so much guilt and shame for those who are the survivors. You feel a lot of guilt that you should have stopped it. And so I think you don't talk about it, and realizing healing only comes through talking about it. We only help those who are struggling to not struggle in silence. And so I think we've grown so much as a society and as a population on how we handle it.
Yeah. When I was reading up on your work for the show and reading the words that you chose to use around your mom and talking about that she loved everybody so well that she didn't have anything left for herself, I thought that was a really beautiful way to describe, what she went through. And just, I thought, goodness gracious, if Dr. Grosso could be the person that defined all of our narrative around this topic, we might not be talking about it today.
Oh, no. I just, I think it comes through too of realizing that when you lose someone to suicide, that their life often gets defined by the way their life ended. And that's not fair.
No.
People who die by suicide had huge lives before and they made huge impacts. And that's how we should choose to remember them. I often say, it's just health, right? Mental health is part of our health. Our mental health impacts our physical health impacts our mental health. And we would never talk about somebody who struggled with a physical health the way we do with mental health. And so really trying to move that narrative.
So I understand your organization has a huge variety of programs and initiatives that are aimed at prevention. So can you highlight some of the initiatives and perhaps their impact on individuals in the community?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to talk about is our walk. So as I mentioned, when my mom died, there wasn't this way to celebrate her life. And so we now have in the fall what are called community walks. So they happen across communities across the whole United States, all within the fall. And then we do campus walks at either K-12 campuses or universities and colleges in the spring. And those are opportunities that people come together just like for other causes, and they register. It's free to walk. You don't have to pay anything. You can fundraise if you choose to. But it's really this beautiful place for people to come together that really care about the cause. Some people have lost someone. Some people have had their own struggles, and some people just care. And so it's a wonderful initiative. And I always say, I think that's some of the best work we do to reduce stigma in communities. Here in Austin, we do ours every fall at the Capitol. And
Of
so,
course.
right? And you can't, like, you're not stopping people from still around the grounds of the Capitol on a weekend. And so you'll get so many people stop by and be like, what's this for? And it's such a good outreach opportunity, and just being public to say, we're walking for this cause. They're called Out of Darkness walks, which was very symbolic of bringing a topic that's often taboo. And as we talked about stigma, out of the darkness and into the light. I always tell people too, through that, we fundraise for everything else we're able to do within the communities. We have tons of fantastic programming that happens in communities and schools and different types of organizations. And those are developed at the national level. So they're very much research-based best practice, and they're routinely updated as we know more of those get updated. And so our general one is Talk Saves Lives. It's sort of like Suicide Prevention 101. And it really goes into just what should you know and what can we as everyday people can do to help someone who might be in need. And so those are two. One other I like to talk about that can impact people is healing conversation. And so those are highly trained, vetted volunteers that help individuals, if they request it, who have lost someone to suicide. So in that aftermath, they have someone who's further along in the journey to talk to, so they don't feel alone and isolated.
So did that, I'm assuming the walks probably have some great stories and interactions. I mean, I'd love to know if there's like any of the, like, you ran into someone and had a great conversation that was totally unexpected that, impacted, or if you've heard of that. But was that the beginning of the birth of the more trained or attentive one-on-one conversations?
Yeah, it's amazing how many people find their way to a walk. That's how I started with AFSP. I didn't mention AFSP also once a year in the summer does an overnight walk, and those are 16 to 18 miles. There is a fundraising minimum. Those are very intense. And I did mine when it was in Dallas. It moved cities. And, the walks are healing in themselves. When you go, there's different colored beads, and you wear the beads to signify how you're associated with the cause. So I wear gold beads because the loss of a parent. There'll be people with white ones. Those are a loss of a child. Blue beads are, I care about the cause. And so there's these moments that you automatically connect with someone without even having to say something. Somebody understands, and there is an immediate acceptance. Mm-hmm. I always tell people it's hard to explain, but you just feel like you're with family in a warm, and like this warm, accepting hug. And so I think for many of us, we find AFSP through the walk, and then we realize all the other work they do and are able then to invest to give back.
That's awesome. So with the emphasis on the research to understand and prevent, like, what are the recent advancements that the research has shown, and how does that inform future work?
Absolutely. So in any type of health issue, we know the more we research, the more we can save lives. It happens with every other leading cause of death. And I think it's important to know that, as I mentioned way back in 87 when AFSP started, that not much money was invested in research, and it still lags behind other leading causes of death. So AFSP continues to be the largest private funder of research. Since 1987, they have funded $80.1 million of research. And just in 2023, it was $9.1 million in new research studies. So they're known that we sort of are the initial, when people are starting to research, fund them, and then they go on, a lot of times, the researchers, to get government grants within research. So I think first for people to know that it's an organization that really invests in the proactive work. But what do we know from research? So much, and we learn more and more. One of my favorite ones to talk about is we only know through research is there's such a big myth that if I ask somebody if they're thinking of killing themselves, if they're not, it's going to plant the idea in their head. And research actually tells us the exact opposite. Through research, we know it actually will help people if they feel like they can get help. And it doesn't plant an idea. That's not how suicide works. Suicide's highly complex. But without research, people would continue to believe that myth. And so it's so much more effective to be able to say, no, this has been studied. And we know that's exactly the opposite.
That's incredible. I actually did not know that.
right? It's like, and I will encourage people, if you're interested in the research AFSP does, I know sometimes people hear research and they're like, okay, that's nerdy. I'm not going to be able to understand it. I love that AFSP makes the research really digestible. So if you go to afsp.org and click under research, they do these amazing, like 2-minute videos on what they're learning through the research grant.
Yeah.
And it's such an easy way to learn even more, and not with all the jargon that can sometimes turn all of us off.
Right. Would you say, like, I'm just thinking out loud here about the research, like with other areas like diabetes and hypertension, like we've made massive advances just in our lifetimes. Is that happening with suicide or mental health in general?
No, and I think that we're seeing suicide rates overall decrease. And then we did have some increase after COVID. And I think the important thing to know is that kind of data is very highly complicated, right? And you might have some age groups, or even different subgroups of that go down while others go up. And so it can be really complicated. But no, overall, we have not seen the drastic decreases that we would hope to. And I will say, even at the highest level, like federal level of funding, we're so much better than we were for suicide, but it's still not funded at the same level that physical health concerns are.
Right. As you were sharing the dollar amounts, and I work in healthcare, I was thinking, Amy, that sounds like pennies compared to, the research we're doing on erectile dysfunction. That, like, really, we're not spending more on mental health.
Well, and I always use the example, this is way back, that remember when Zika came around?
Yes.
And before Zika, as it was coming in, like nobody had died or anything, that it was funded at $1 billion for research and prevention. And I knew the numbers of mental health and suicide, and it didn't even come close to that. And so
your number was under that. And that was since the 80s or 90s.
Well, and that's just AFSP funded. That's not nationally funded.
Right.
But still, AFSP did it because it wasn't being nationally funded.
Yeah.
Wow. So, and that's a lot of the work AFSP does, not just the research, but then advocating for more research dollars, advocating the awareness that this is happening. How do we lower stigma about mental health so that we can invest in different areas?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, in the meantime, before we get it all figured out, individuals obviously have a huge role in helping prevent suicide. So what are some of the practical, actionable things that people can do to protect their loved ones?
Absolutely.
Or strangers or anybody?
Right. For me, it's all about awareness. I encourage everyone listening to whatever social media platform you prefer. There's tons of different ones. Go follow AFSP. Your local chapter will have a page too, but just follow the national one. The amount of content that comes out to just help you understand more about suicide prevention. And then I also encourage you just to repost those things. I have been amazed of the number of people who reach out to me just because I'm open, that I am a person that's willing to talk about suicide. It will be close acquaintances that reach out, but it'll also be very, very distant acquaintances through social media that will reach out and say, hey, this happened, or do you have a resource for this? And so I think the more we're open about what we share, I know we always hear about the negatives of social media, but I think in this realm, it has such a positive influence. And so I think that's one thing. Another is join a community walk, not being afraid to say, I'm going to go walk for suicide prevention, and this is why. Another thing, if you're curious about advocacy and that kind of things, like how do I advocate in my state or even at the national level, AFSP makes it really, really easy. So if you go to the website and just click on advocacy, you can become an advocate. So you put your information in, and anytime either your state or the national level that something comes up, they email you and say, email your senator, email this, and you click like 3 buttons and it gets emailed. So it's really easy. And I love to tell people that I think sometimes we feel like, does that really make a difference? And for people listening, if you weren't aware, 988 is the National Suicide Lifeline number. That used to be a 1-800 number. And through advocacy effort, just like I'm talking about, it became a 3-digit number a few years ago. And we already know it saves lives because call volumes have skyrocketed.
For sure.
It's honestly still, as you say that out loud, I'm like, I know that, but it's not ingrained in my mind like everything else. It is so recent. It doesn't have that like history that, oh, this is what happens. This is where you go. So that's fantastic. That's come out of the advocacy piece of it.
And just
Right.
for, here in Texas, all schools like middle school, high school, and then college students, the numbers have to be printed on the back of their ID badges. And so I think it's those little things. I think when we think about suicide prevention, we think it's these gigantic, monumentous efforts. And I don't. I think it's the everyday little things we can do. We'll never know if it saves a life, but I know by us not doing anything, we're going to continue to lose way too many people.
For sure. And then on a personal level, having been affected by suicide, I am one of those people that if I'm not sure you're okay, I'm just going to ask. I'd rather you hate me and not die. But I understand that could also have a negative impact. So what do you have any just, generic across the board advice for people on, if they have individuals in their life that they're concerned about, and do you keep your mouth shut? Do you say something? How do you not alienate them, but love them?
Mm-hmm. I think you always say something. That's not something I think you want to have happen the next day. Something happened and you wonder why you didn't say anything. And I think knowing too, like we talked about the myth, if they're not thinking about it, maybe they are struggling in a different way, which opens the door that they're willing to say, no, but you're right. I'm having a hard time. And if you're a parent, I think sometimes we wonder about that. And I always say, we do these wonderful things like call the helpline, like all of these, which are great. At the same time, it's really hard for a person to ask for help. It's really hard for a kid to admit if they're having thoughts of wanting to die. And so if we're not willing to ask that, how hard would it be for them to tell us? And so I always look at it as like, how do you open the door for a conversation?
And how do you even be aware that that conversation is needed, or stopping in your own life to pay more attention to those around you? Because that's my story. Friend, came into my life twice, 2 days beforehand, after a period of time, and I had no clue. Looking back, should have seen stuff.
Yeah.
To that time, would never cross my mind.
Well, and as I always say, I use this example, especially in my current role, that there's all these little puzzle pieces that don't get put together until after. And a lot of times it's because we didn't have education or training to know what to look for. I can look now and see so many things from my mom, or, we can what if forever. But the reality is I didn't know then, but I know now, so I know better. And I think that's the education efforts, the even social media campaigns that we do, is just to bring in awareness of, hey, if you notice this kind of change in a friend or a loved one, reach out to them, like giving you permission to trust your instincts. I think sometimes we justify everything away of they're just having a bad day because we don't know what to do and we feel completely ill-equipped. What if they say they are struggling?
Well, it's probably better to practice when they're not struggling too, about asking how someone's doing and really meaning it, because you actually want to pay attention to someone.
Absolutely. And I do want to mention a few years ago, the AFSP started a partnership with the Ad Council and the Jed Foundation, and they launched this ad campaign called Seize the Awkward. And it's really targeted at older teens and young adults, but how do you seize those awkward moments to actually reach out to a friend? And they use a lot of famous YouTube personalities. I'll admit, I don't know who any of them are because I'm in a world with a 10-year-old and that's not what I've watched, but teens and young adults really gravitate towards that. And it's something that speaks to them. And so they're always updating content with that, which I think is just a great example of how to reach different demographics. What works for someone like me, who's a middle-aged mom, isn't the same as something for a 20-year-old.
Yeah. So, all right. So that's one collaboration with the Ad Council. So what other kind of organizations does AFSP collaborate with? Is it predominantly other outreach organizations, communications, healthcare, policymakers? How are you guys, who are you working with to advance the prevention efforts?
Yes to all of those. And I think this is one thing, even in the 10 years I've been with AFSP, I've seen such a growth. I think part of that's just the growth of the organization, but I also think we're in a time that society is more willing to want to talk about these things. And so other organizations that typically haven't been about mental health are starting to talk to. Like one of the newest ones we have is AFSP is collaborating with the American Academy of Pediatrics. And so how do we help our pediatricians know at a deeper level, not just what to look for, but how to have those conversations? And so that one's a really exciting one as we look at the numbers of suicide being impacted in our younger, even younger kids. And so I love that one. Our newest, biggest one is with Bechtel, which is one of the largest construction companies in the world. And they approached AFSP and are helping fund research and programming because construction workers die by suicide at 5 times the rate as the general population. So,
really?
Yeah, you don't know these things, right? And so they came to AFSP and just said, we want to make an investment. We need your help because we see this as a health risk to our workers.
So just curiosity. So which one's more at risk, the construction workers or the firefighter police?
It probably depends on what you like. And I would say yes, right? Like, or veterans. Veterans have high rates. And so AFSP is partnered with veterans. And so I think it's amazing to see how much the partnerships help and get the word out. We've had a partnership the last few years with Odyssey, which is radio stations across the U.S. And so being able to do great things with them, they give us free airtime to promote walks and stuff, but then also other resources get out there and they do podcasts on mental health. So it really helps reach different avenues of people that we normally wouldn't.
That's really cool to see all the scope of that. Cause you can't do it by yourself, and to see all that and just, again, looking at the American Academy of Pediatrics, that's like, if that's a leading cause, that should be up there with flu.
Right. Like we talk about those things all the time. So we need to talk about these. And if a parent's worried, they're going to go to their pediatrician first. And so how do we help the pediatrician feel more confident in these conversations?
Yeah. And they don't necessarily have the time in their practice. So they need a lot of tools and need to be able to rapidly identify at-risk kids. That is a brilliant collaboration.
Yeah. So it's so exciting to see. And, like I said, I really think we're somewhere in society where we're more willing to talk about these things. And so it's becoming easier for those collaborations to happen.
Yeah. What about the school districts? And I know that you've spent a ton of your career working to protect kids within the schools. Does AFSP collaborate with at that level?
Yeah, they offer one of my favorite resources AFSP has. It's called a sample school policy on suicide prevention. And that's a free thing just on the website that schools, if they don't know where to start, that it's done in collaboration with the American School Counseling Association, the American Association of School Psychologists. So really working with experts within schools. And so it helps know what to do, like what are best practices within this. And then they also, and people don't want to talk about this, but they also provide support in best practices for campuses if there has been a student suicide. So there is information on like what are best practices, how do you handle this, what are things you should be doing, because when that happens at a school, employees don't know what to do. And I think sometimes when we don't know what to do, then we freeze and then we don't do anything. And so it really research-based, what are those things we can do? There's programming for middle school and high schools that can come in. Even the Talk Save Lives that I talked about when I was at a school district, we did that with all of our staff every year. I trained our bus drivers in suicide prevention. When we talk about schools, we often think about teachers, which yes, teachers are critical, but there's so many support staff that see our students in different aspects. Oh my gosh. Bus drivers.
The school nurse.
Yeah. Oh, we school nurses, like you have to think cafeteria workers, like who are those people that see kids in different situations and have valuable information and letting them know what they should do.
Yeah. One of our kiddos, I don't think she would mind me sharing this. She spent a lot of time in the nurse's office in elementary school. And she was a grown adult before I realized that I had an anxious human on my hands, and the nurse's office was just her safe place.
Absolutely. That was me as a kid. Highly
Yes.
perfectionistic, overachiever, anxiety fueled it all.
Yep.
Tummy aches aren't just tummy aches.
Nope. Nope. In fact, I need to track down Janie Hislop and thank her for creating a safe space.
Absolutely.
Well, you have shared a ton of good information about what you guys are already doing, but I sense that you're not an organization that stops at status quo. So what's next for you guys? What are you working on?
I think the biggest thing is we are about at the end of our 3-year strategic plan. And I will say, as a person who loves organization and data informed decision making based on research, I probably have stuck with AFSP because it's led in that way. So the strategic plan process is always been, it's overseen by the national board, but they gather information from every chapter, from chapter leaders like myself. You get asked, like, what are the needs, where you are, and really looking at that as a whole, but also where we are as a society, what are trends that are happening, and where do we go next? We talked about all the partnerships this last 3-year plan. One of the big things was increasing partnerships. And so knowing that's happening. And so the strategic plan, this one ends in 25. And so the process for developing the next one has already started. Like they've already sent surveys to chapters, all of those things. And so I think that's the exciting thing about this work, is realizing we're never satisfied and there's always more we can be doing. I think it's a balance though, right? In this work, we could always focus on that and not take stock of what we have done. The CEO of AFSP one time said at one of our leadership conferences that our losses are so visible, but our saves aren't. And I try to hold that really close to me, because when there is a loss, it's easy to only focus on that. And we don't know the number of lives that are saved because of the work. It's hard to quantify that.
Yeah. I mean, is there anybody even attempting to quantify attempted suicides? I would assume most go unreported unless they end up in a hospital.
Yeah. I mean, if it's in the hospital, there's a thing. And, and that's some of the research, like what is impactful. AFSP has started doing so much research, like with our programming, and at the end of the programming, like before and after, like did participants' knowledge increase? And so that's a lot of the work that has started, which is important. But, I never know that one thing I shared with someone, if it helps something down the line. Like we don't know those little nuggets we give. We talked about, like, did I miss an opportunity to say something? But we don't know the opportunities we do take, if those were life-saving.
Yeah. I mean, and I'm sure people don't get anecdotal feedback all the time because someone still doesn't want to say something about it. And, there's, all the times that happens that you do get anecdotal feedback. So from that, I mean, have to take anecdotal data as some kind of data for a data nerd. Are there some of these stories that you've heard that have impacted you near and dear?
Absolutely. So we call those an AFSP mission moment, like moments that help us ground us in our work. And so I think of two right off the top of my head. Had chaired our first campus walk at the school I was at. And afterwards, we did a talk Safe Lives for any of the adults that wanted to come, because I'm like, besides just walking, we should give them good information. And did the presentation, and one of the principals who is near and dear to my heart later, quite a bit later, told me that after that, she realized, oh my gosh, I'm seeing so much of this in my teenage daughter. So she went home and had a conversation with her, and the daughter had experienced some suicidal thoughts, and they were able to get her help. And she's so successful, already off in college and doing great things.
Yay.
And we don't get to hear those a lot. The ones I hear more of, and sometimes I have to remember that they're mission moments too, is helping people when they've lost someone to suicide. And it happens a lot, because when you yourself are a suicide loss survivor, you know what people are going through. And so most of my mission moments are being with people in times when most people want to walk away because it's hard, it's uncomfortable, people don't know what to say.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, and I've never seen, like, I think the strongest people I know are those like you who have been so closely impacted. And it's amazing. And I think y'all are amazing.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yep. So what can our listeners do? I mean, I know you've mentioned the social media and the walks. Are there other ways they can be involved or support the mission?
Absolutely. AFSP.org. You can, I would say, just look in general, check out videos on there. We have a great communications team, but also you can look for your chapter. So you put in where you are and it'll show you where your nearest chapter is. There might be events going on or even education sessions. COVID helped us all go a lot more virtual. So a lot of those are even happening virtually. So you can learn more about it. I think too, and I hope people would say, don't be afraid to talk about it. With the walks, I often get asked like, oh, can kids come? And I'm like, well, my son, since he was 18 months old, has been walking. And they're like, what? And I'm like, well, you describe it in ways they can get it, right? Like at first it was just, we want to make sure nobody ever feels alone. So that's why we walk. And he got it. But, as the years have gone on, he understands why we walk, and he understands what suicide is, and he understands the importance, and he wears beads that represent that he's lost a relative because he never knew his grandma, but he knows that's part of the story and that he can do something about it. And so I think too often we're fearful of saying something. And so we don't say anything, and realizing that we are never going to continue to make progress until more and more people start talking about it.
Fantastic. Thank you for all of your work, the investment, the organization, and sharing the stories with us so that we can be part of that moving forward.
Absolutely. And I really appreciate y'all being willing to have a conversation that sometimes people think is really hard, because once again, we don't know how many people will listen to this and how much it could help them.
Well, I don't know about you, but I learned a ton from Dr. Amy Grosso. I so appreciate her passion for prevention and for helping those that have been affected by suicide. I love all the work that their organization is doing. Brett and I have already signed up for the walk in Austin, and we hope that you guys will join us in helping to advance suicide prevention. For more information, go to their website, afsp.org.